The biggest question YouTube channel owners ask is how to join YouTube's incredibly lucrative partner program, where they pay you a king's ransom for views you generate. At least $10 to hundreds per every 1,000 views. Content marketing is how you get there. Outsourcing is very popular for successful online businesses. In some cases, outsourcing is a necessity for your business especially. If scaling your online concern is a high priority for you, doing things that you're not highly skilled in sometimes requires you to invest in a professional who is highly proficient in that area you're lacking, or may be too busy to divide your attention to address. So, not having a good VA professional could even be a symptom of why your business is sputtering along versus effortless scalability and growth. There are VA professionals that mainly focus on marketing digitally on social media, a vital cog in an online business, or a lead gen website, or funnel. If you stay tuned till the end of this video, you'll learn how to get this amazing service called social media payouts for your business or any other online concerns.
In today's Neville Goddard discussion, I titled our mind map, "To the Degree I Am Self-Persuaded." Now, building upon the conversation we had on Thursday, in which we reconciled that confidence and charisma is inherent within all of us. That's what I believe. And I've seen it express in myself and others when it comes to communicating and dealing with others in a wide array of contexts: relationships, friendships, personal life, career, business. One of the favorite activities of mine, if we can call that, a pastime or a hobby, is actually cause and effect reflections, to observe the effects in a person's results, my own results with others that I meet, and track it back to certain identification with certain thinking patterns. One of the things that I enjoy doing is sharing my findings in these videos. Not only have many benefited from these findings, but I also find it to be a further, you could say, autosuggestion to help me realize more so every day that what I identify with, we could say assume, believe, or more accurately put, what I say I am too, both consciously and unconsciously, expresses itself in how I relate with others. So thus, we want to encourage, track it back to the source of the cause within to the degree that we are self-persuaded. So I want to share some stories, and we're going to tie into the discussion some quotes from Neville. The first being the following. He says, "If you really believe me, you will not pass anyone without doing something to lift his burden. Taking up his cross, you will represent him to yourself as you would like to see him. And to the degree that you are self-persuaded, he will become it, even though he may never know what you did." So I want to share some stories as I've been working with this information, and it was interesting because I thought I knew it to a large degree until I came across Neville's information, and I really started to see the parallels of the internal and the outer aspects of life, the reflections or the effects in relating with others. Two friends, for whatever the reason may be, I had, let's say, inharmonious relationships with them. It wasn't as consistent or congruent or harmonious that I would like it to be. And, these two friends, there would be conflict during and after and somewhat resentment and whatever else. And I was thinking to myself, this information, if I can apply it to these relationships that I have with these two friends, and I can actually see the change, reflect exactly how I imagine them to be in their ideal, thus lifting their burden as a result of lifting my own burden within, then we are really onto something here, and this is powerful for entrepreneurs, business people, day-to-day life, relationships, and the transformative nature will give even further understanding and depths of awareness to many fields of, let's say, persuasion, communication, neurolinguistic programming, psychology, and so forth. But I got to prove it in equation. Now, I had internal resistance because I had experienced these two individuals to be, let's say, I thought them to be conflict-inducing, as in I thought that they were the ones that would induce conflicts during our interaction, even though I would consider them to be close friends. You could say the relationship was a little bittersweet. We enjoyed our time together, but yet there were things that we would conflict about. Now, having realized that the cause is within, I recognized that for whatever the reason may be, I was interpreting them a certain way. I was seeing them a certain way. So I began to, you could say, lift their burden by lifting my own burden. I started to see them differently. Now, one individual, I could actually allow myself to see them differently. I said, you know what, this really can be possible with this individual. For whatever the reason, I might have thought it was impossible at one time. I really do believe it's possible. And over the course of the months that followed, I observed the changes in them. They would reflect the exact behaviors, communication, and relationship that I imagined them to be. Now, this happened with one individual gradually over the course, and with the other individual, I wouldn't see the changes. So I'm thinking to myself, why is it happening with one individual? They're actually reflecting that what I imagined them to be, which is actually how they really are, which is an embodiment of love. And so thus, a harmonious relationship has to be the essence of a person. Earl Nightingale said this in The Strangest Secret, and this had inspired me for many years. He said, people are basically good. And so I wanted to continue to encourage that in my life, wherever I go. So when I found these opportunities to practice what we discussed, I took them on. And I knew that one day I would be making this video and sharing the experience of it. And the other individual, in which at that time I did not know the reasons, and that on the journey I did find the reasons, seemed to remain in that state of mind in which really I was in that state of mind in relation to them, and seemed to play out that same conflict again and again and again. And I'm like, why is it that the other individual had changed and the other one didn't? And then, I was reminded again to go back to the cause because I didn't change within. Now, the thing about that is I realized that I had interpretations in relation to some of their behavioral patterns. For example, if they said something to me, it would, let's say, cause me to react a certain way. And then through that reactivity, I would go into a different state of mind in relation to them. So one could say I didn't persist, as Neville Goddard refers to it, in the state of mind. I didn't maintain the representation of how I saw him to be to the degree of self-persuasion that I was doing it with the other individual. So I started to take some notes. And I said, what are the interpretations I'm giving to what this person is doing? What are my reactivity-based emotional responses revealing? I believe behaviors reveal, emotions reveal, thoughts reveal. They reveal what we are saying I am to, both consciously and unconsciously. Now, this was happening unconsciously, so I wanted to know what was going on. And then I started to find certain beliefs. And these beliefs, for whatever the reason may be, I identified with them. They were unconscious. Now I brought conscious awareness to those beliefs. And one of the beliefs was that this person is way more influential than I am. And thus, they have the power to direct the conversation in whatever direction that they want. It's interesting because although we seem to catch ourselves in many regards observing where we are assigning meaning, there seems to be certain times where we fall back asleep and we automatically surrender to that principle of authority that we talked about, referencing Dr. Robert Cialdini's work in Influence: The Psychology of Persuasion. I recommend watching the video. I released it on Thursday. Fell unconsciously asleep to a certain thinking pattern in which for many years it had formed a belief in me. So I went in and did the subconscious mind work by having an inner dialogue with myself of how it actually is. And to me, the accurate and true interpretation that was found within is that he really is a representative of the spirit of love. And so thus, he wants harmonious relations. And although I might have been unconsciously perceiving him to be a certain way in regards to what I had assumed him to be for many years and thus forming a belief system, I know that he really truly wants a harmonious relationship with me, one of mutual benefit. And I started to say things in reference to, again, on Thursday's video, I belong, I'm in harmony, I'm one with. And this is fair mutual value exchange. One is not greater than the other. We are both an embodiment and a representation of mutual divine love, or something like that. Now I communicate to myself in this kind of way because that's how I'm able to allow the information to go into my subconscious mind. See, thinking patterns, ways of thinking, may create unnecessary resistance to allowing the suggestions to be accepted. The conscious mind is considered to be the watchman at the gate and allows information to go into the subconscious mind. So working with Neville's information, he recommends a state akin to sleep. And we talked about a few ways of doing it in last Sunday's video. I'll put a link in the description to it. And one of the reasons why I believe it was recommended was because this is where we allow ourselves to be more suggestible to that what we imagine. I realized that I was persisting really more so in a different state of mind, which was in relation to how this individual would say certain things to me or communicate certain things to me, in which I would react to strongly identifying with that other state of mind in which I was persisting in that caused the effects of the relationship to be that certain way. And so I found what it was that I was believing, what I was interpreting. It was there. The subconscious mind revealed it upon reflection, cause and effect reflection. And I changed my thinking pattern. Because how do we get these thinking patterns in the first place? We form conclusions based on our interpretations of how we relate to the five sensory experience. This has been the case since we were born. Now that we have become more aware that we're doing this, we also have the power to change how we relate. Or as Neville Goddard puts it, taking up his cross, you will represent him to yourself as you would like to see him. So now we're talking about degree of self-persuasion. We want to be far more self-persuaded to our inner world suggestion, which impresses upon the subconscious mind and expresses accordingly on certain regards, and so that we could allow it to express through our five sensory experience. And if we find ourselves being reactive, perhaps we are identifying more so with certain thinking patterns in relation to the five sensory experience and our own suggestions within in relation to the five sensory experience, thus bringing us into different states of mind. And if we can find these thinking patterns, and the way to do it is quite simple. You know what it is that you desire. You know what it is that you desire to experience as far as your relationships go with people. Observe how you react to the various things they do, that they say, that they, whatever it is, and recognize that those experiences, those emotional reactions, the ways of thinking, the behavioral patterns, are messengers revealing to you your level of congruence and your degree of self-persuasion in relation to your vision. So he says, as you pray for your friends, you will discover your own capacity is lifted. Your cross becomes lighter and lighter until finally you are light itself. Now this is interesting because I recognize as we discover these thinking patterns within ourselves and we release from these thinking patterns and identify with the true thinking patterns, it's easier to apply this in all areas of our life. To the opportunity of having to make peace with my friends, creating harmonious relationship, these two individuals, which is really a result of making peace within, the inner reconciliation, as we talked about in Thursday's video. I found it was easier to represent this way of being with others. I noticed I became even more lighthearted when I was relating with people, wherever I am. Could be walking down the street, I could be in an airport, I could be at a coffee shop, I could be at a restaurant. I notice how I relate to people has become even more lighthearted thanks to the opportunity that these two friends provided me. Now, I might have mentioned this before in one of my earlier videos. I had a mentor that showed up pretty early in my life and taught me a very valuable lesson. He had achieved a lot of success. He started out in the company that he worked for at an entry-level position and moved himself up all the way to chief executive officer. He asked me a question. He said, "What's the greatest thing that you could do in life?" And I recognize that when someone asks me a question like that, they had learned something valuable that for their life, it was, you could say, one of their greatest gifts that they would share to people. And I also believe that we could also have different answers to that question. But I wanted to hear his version of it, so I gave him my answer. I don't remember what I said. And he said, the greatest thing that you can do in your life is to turn an enemy into a friend. Now, this is something that I realize more so every day on this journey. Because it's to the degree that I am self-persuaded. So I can find different opportunities in my friendships, in my relationships, everywhere I go, to observe how I am representing people in my own mind's eye. And observe the theater that's playing out as a result of my own representation of them in my mind's eye. And over the course of applying that advice that he gave me, I noticed that it is true that it does become lighter. I noticed that when I relate to people, it seems a lot more flow-based. Conversations seem to flow. There seems to be a greater degree of mutual understanding. There seems to be a greater acceptance of perhaps even divergent viewpoints, different ways of looking at reality. And we also find commonality. There seems to be an acceptance, a genuine acceptance of different ways of thinking and similar ways of thinking. I don't even think that one way is better than the other. Whereas before I might have said, oh, if someone has different ways of thinking, maybe some of those thinking patterns I would have condemned. And we talked about this, releasing from self-condemnation, which expresses itself as acceptance for others. Now, we belong. Everywhere you go, you belong. You could say it, I belong. And when you recognize that you belong, what plays out in theater is other people expressing the representation of the theatrical experience or the play, however you want to define it. I look at reality as more of like a theatrical play to reflect what we say I am to within. And to the degree that we accept or we say I am too, belonging, as in I belong within, I'm complete within, it expresses itself accordingly. And other people play out that love that you represent, because when you say I am in relation to belonging, you're essentially saying I am love. And so he says, don't say something cannot be done. For the minute you do, you are placing a limit upon yourself. And don't limit your friend because of his financial, social, or intellectual background. That's a heavy cross for him to bear. Rather lift his cross and set him free. So I like this. This is another way of saying turning an enemy into a friend. And the enemy really is within. It's what we consider to be an enemy. And we don't have to have enemies within. This is an important realization, one that was heavily inspired by the book The Kabbalion. In the Father, Mother mind, all mortal children are at home. Thus you are safe in mind. If you allow yourself to say, I belong in mind, I am safe in mind. Mind is a beautiful thing. Another thing Earl Nightingale said was, mind is one of the last known unexplored continents. And it really is. It's a vast infinity that you can travel into. This whole journey of life seems to be an expression of how we travel within. And the degree of self-persuasion to our internal world of being it the way that we, you could say, assume it to be, imagine it to be, believe it to be, perceive it to be, does represent itself. And if for whatever the reason we seem to notice that certain states of mind are persisting, we want to ask ourselves, what is our thinking, both consciously and unconsciously, that which we are saying I am too? And make peace with those thinking patterns. Find the accurate and true perspectives. Now, I really like this perspective. He says that's a heavy cross for him to bear. Rather lift his cross and set him free. So when I see people, more so every day, I realize that if for whatever the reason they have a cross to bear, or I interpret them as a cross to bear, I can imagine them as achieving success, having what they want, experiencing what they truly desire, living their dreams, allowing their intuition to guide them, representing them of how what I had found within myself had brought forth the entrepreneurial success and the different successes. And I said, how I do one thing is how I do everything. I could apply it for other areas. I trust you found this to be helpful, and perhaps it adds some nuanced distinction or some slight variation of perspectives, which I always aim to contribute in these videos, as we always say the same thing, but we may say it in different ways, many different perspectives, many different interpretations, which go back to the one cause, I am, in which this whole reality is expressed from. And transcendent to the personal I, here's the interesting thing. Each one of my friends had their own stories of how they now changed and became how they became. We have these harmonious relationships now, and they have their own stories of how they changed. So Neville was right. He says, taking up his cross, you will represent him to yourself as you would like to see him. And to the degree that you are self-persuaded, he will become it, even though he may never know what you did. I never told him these things. But maybe they were thinking the same thing about me. Personally, I don't think that far into it. I go back to the one cause within, that which I consciously and unconsciously say I am too, to transform my world according. This has been the case all throughout the years, since I came across the information in 2004 with Think and Grow Rich, and then I met my mentor in 2000. All throughout the years, ever since I was a child, and we all have, had seen the signs and seen the information that said the same thing. And the more we encourage, so we can say the light is always there. The light presents itself as a teacher, or information, or an experience that connects us back to what he says. Blake said the ancients believed that if you are self-persuaded, it was so. There was a time in imagination where a firm persuasion removed mountains. So what is our perceived mountains? That's a good question to ask. Recognize that one no longer has to identify with certain thinking patterns that psychologically creates mental mountains that seem to stand in the way to having the kind of relationships, the kind of friendships, the kind of experiences that you truly want to have. Those are mental mountains. So imagination and a firm persuasion. So let's go back to the two examples. Number one is when you can imagine yourself and allow yourself to assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled or identify with that which you saw in imagination as the reality in imagination, then what ends up happening is it expresses itself. And if you notice that the changes are not occurring and whatnot, then perhaps it's certain thinking patterns that we continuously react to. And when we make peace with those thinking patterns, in alchemy we call this purification of the mind. The mental transmutation, the mental alchemy process really is about identifying these thinking patterns which have been referred to as impurities in the mind and releasing them to reveal the pure gold nature of who you truly are. So I trust you found this video to be helpful. Let's go ahead and conclude this with an auto-suggestion to encourage. We can say, I recognize that every day I have opportunities to see those that reveal themselves on my journey to realizing my vision for how they truly are, which is love in harmony and in contribution to my vision, and my vision in love and contribution to theirs. I recognize mind playing out as theater, expressing itself in various ways to reveal what we say I am to, both consciously and unconsciously. Thus, I have the joy and opportunity each day to identify with the true and accurate thinking, thus lifting the burden from others, which actually is a result of lifting the burden from myself as I feel the internal peace and harmony, bringing forth reality to reflect how I truly am. This elevates my self-persuasion to the degree that I know that I belong. Everywhere I go, there I am at home where I belong. This expresses itself in the outer aspects of my life, further revealing how this is true, and thus reflecting in my relationships